It's funny the things I realize when I'm trying to think up what to do next for random review. For instance, in spite of owning 9 different versions of the mold, currently owning 7 versions of the mold, and naming one version of the mold one of the best Transformers of the previous decade, I've never reviewed a classic Seeker mold. Which is, like, bizarre. How could I own it that many times and talk it up when I've never actually reviewed it? So, let's review one that didn't quite qualify for my top 10 of the decade because it was released in the year afterwards. This is Generations Thrust. He's a pretty one. Now, take a close look at him right off the bat so you can see he is a beautiful metallic burgundy color. It's a really unique shade. It's very unlike anything I've really seen on a Transformer. And of course, it is a signature color of Thrust. It's not really something you see on anything else. I think it makes a good shade of red for a Decepticon. You know, 'cause it's so much darker than, you know, the typical stuff you'd see used on a Transformer. And I think it conveys very well that this is a more menacing style of jet. And of course, it is also with some gray plastic for wings, tail fins, and other such details that we'll show off in a bit. This toy caused a bit of a stir when it was released. See, Bacon in 2007 did Games of Deception, which released the 3 Seekers that Hasbro had failed to release at the time. Well, fans did not take kindly to having to pay that much money just to complete their Seeker sets, so eventually Takara went and made these new wings and these new thrusters, or VTOLs actually, to create their own thrust to release over there. And then Hasbro said, hey, that's a good idea, because it technically doesn't look like the Botcon toy anymore. The wings work completely differently, so they just ran with it, because, you know, why not? And we eventually got all 6 at retail, but this is the one that kind of started it all. It is a very different wing setup, where the Botcon went for a very traditional molding on the wing. It's all one unit. Here, Takara, and thus Hasbro, went a more unique approach and had the pieces peg in. So technically this is the wing molding and this is an accessory that you attach on. However, that ended up creating something rather interesting. And we'll go over the usuals, paint and such in a little bit, but it created a unique setup where you can actually make the toy modular. As you can see, if you want it on the underside to see more of the wing but still have the same profile and silhouette, you can do that. If you want to do the Gente thing, which is the weird subline they released this guy in Japan, you can take these off and plug them into the back and get something more solid, more unique looking for a Seeker. And then, of course, you know, these can peg in on the underside and create something a little bit different looking. You can peg these in on the underside of the tail fins. You can peg them on top, you know, peg them down there. All the pegs are the same size. So it's a pretty modular toy and adds a surprising amount of play value to what is otherwise a pretty worn out mold at this point. You know, by now the toy had been released at retail 3 times, plus the collector's versions, plus all the versions that came out in Japan. So by the time this guy actually made it to US markets, you pretty much had the mold. So to actually come up with something that not only avoided copying Botcon's figure, but also created something that gave more play value to the figure was really unique. Other things that are unique about this toy: the deco on the wings is actually more accurate than Takara's version. They went with this really weird, like, stunt show style deco on the wings, which is something like the US toys did. And then the US went and said, no, we're going to make it more cartoon accurate, which is strange. What else is strange? It's using Takara's new wing molds and new tail fins, and it still has a chromed interior just like the Gente version of the figure. However, it's actually the 2006 version of the mold. It's the original Seeker mold. They found out, well, it's going to bank no matter how many times we make it, so they recast it and started releasing them all over again. But strangely enough, yeah, you look at the copyright molding on this. It's the original version, so it's got the new wings on the old mold. It's got Japanese chrome, but it's got brand new cartoon accurate things that work. There's a lot going on this toy. It's kind of weird. So besides that, yeah, it's got little nubs on the bottom for landing gear. Yeah, you can see it's pretty much got all the same details you would expect out of the classic Seeker mold, panels and thrust units and all these kinds of bits and bobs. And I've talked about this toy a lot, and we're not even at the robot mode yet, so let me go ahead and get to that, because I really do like this jet. I always like the look of the VTOLs and the wings, even though I don't think they ever actually came into play in the cartoon, now that I think of it. So, just get all that stuff. You can actually transform it with the VTOLs attached in any of the slots, now that I think of it. It's just easier to deal with to get them out of the way now. Go ahead and fold up the landing gear, and fold the wings forward on these little double hinges. Boop, boop. Now I'll flip this guy over, get the feet folded out, and extend out the legs. Open up, crack open the back, and unfold the arms. Yeah, pretty much anyone who's been into Transformers in the last 10 years probably owns at least one version of this toy, so I'm not really going over anything, too revolutionary here. I do like how, I've always liked how the nose cone deals with itself and transforms away. That's all well and good. Like that. Okay, so let's go with a little bit more of a traditional configuration. We'll go ahead and plug the missile launchers into the arms to form the null rays, which is typical of the Seeker. We'll go ahead and attach these down to the legs, because Thrust was known for having his wings much lower down, so that creates the vestige of the original toy. And just like that, we have our Thrust in robot mode, looking quite good. Like, I'm always been happy with Thrust. Like, I could boil it down to where I have different elements I really love in all of the Seekers. And for Thrust, it is the physical design. I think the VTOL wings and just the overall shape and color scheme work out extremely well. It's not the best color scheme of the Seekers, that would be Sky Warp's, but I do think it works extremely well. I'm going to go ahead and give you the look at his cone head. Of course, very stern face molded in on the underside. The cone head was always kind of funny, because it's mostly just derived from the original toy being mistransformed more than anything. But it works out. It made him stand out and made him unique. It gave him a way of actually making the toy a new character without actually coming up with anything new. I was trying to remember, yeah, it's very hard to see, but his eyes are painted yellow. It's very hard to see against that kind of chalk white face. Now, deco-wise, you can see there's plenty revealed here that was not in vehicle mode. This is basically everything that was on the underside. You can see it's all still mostly cast in the burgundy plastic, but all of this section up here, to be more accurate to the original toy, is painted into a very nice dark gray, which color matches to the molded plastic quite well. I like the gold detailing too. It breaks up the burgundy just a little bit. I like how it takes up the inner parts of the intakes at the top. One of the best parts about these newer versions of the Seekers, they actually painted these side pieces that are the landing gear. That's the big thing I really don't like about the first 3 Seekers released, was this part was left completely unpainted, so it was just this weird block of a different color, and it really broke up the look of the chest. So I was always happy that the newer versions fixed that. And we get some extra silver deco and a little bit of extra gray down the legs just to break things up. He does have a much more solid color going on than most Seekers do. Just a little bit different from the others. I'm really happy with how the toy looks. I mean, it's blocky, it's got the proportions in the right spot. One of the things I always made me love the toy was just how much it represented how the character looked in the cartoon. Of course, they had to take liberties with this design to avoid BotCon's version. So there are differences, the original Thrust didn't have wings sticking out the sides like that. But for the most part, it looks extremely good. Like, it's still, look-wise, I think it still really nails it. Now, Where it does kind of fall apart is when we start getting into articulation, because there are problems there. The head does rotate, but what's left of the cockpit on the back of the head is going to obstruct it. We have universal shoulders, which are going to get hindered by the wings unless you fold them back. We have elbows that go to the 90 degrees, no wrist rotation, no waist rotation, ball joints in the hips, a little bit hindered going forward, but great side-to-side motion. A knee joint, which is almost 90 degrees. I'll be generous and call it 90. And a rotation just below the knee. And nothing in the feet. No rocking, no tilting, no nothing. So he's kind of stuck a little bit. There are certain things that a seeker should be able to do. I think pointing the null ray forward and still having it like face up and be on top of the arm is one. The mold cannot quite accomplish that. You'll also notice he's not the tightest mold. Being the original version of the mold, you'll notice the launchers don't quite peg in too well. There's parts that kind of unfold a little bit too easily for my taste. It's solid enough. It can hold a pose just fine, but for the most part, this is where the toy started showing its age. In the previous decade, yeah, it was definitely one of the best toys, but moving forward, it really did stand out in the Generations line as just being a little bit inferior engineering-wise. It still did everything a Seeker toy should do, because that's why it made my list. This toy was everything fans wanted out of a modern version of the Seeker toys, and it did it really, really well. But it just, as time goes on and the other toys started enhancing in engineering, working up better articulation, etc., the classic Seeker mold just kind of fell behind. So it's not quite what it once was. The mold has aged, and we're kind of in the need of a new G1 Deluxe Starscream style mold. It's probably going to be a long time before we come close to getting it, but I don't know. These days you'd expect bicep rotation at the bicep. You'd expect a waist rotation or ankle tilts and things like that. I just think the more times they released it, the more times it ran up against other figures being released that were noticeably better. And while it was great in its day, it does start to age. That said, I do think Thrust is, to play-wise, the best of all the versions, just because of how modular he is and just how much you can do just by swapping some parts around. And of course, that's not even counting his missile launchers, which we're not even going to demonstrate on camera, because anytime you fire a missile on camera and you're not paying attention to where it goes, you end up catching me on stream nights on Tuesdays and Thursdays for a cheap plug. There, now you have to join me on stream nights. That's how it works. You should really find that. That just kind of messed up the final shot. Yep, it vanished into the wormhole that is stream nights. So we'll just wrap it up here. Yeah, it's a toy that's shown its age, but I still think it has a lot of merit, and Thrust probably got the best run of the toys. It's got a lot more playability than the other versions of the Seekers. I happen to really like the color scheme. It is very unique. The metallic burgundy is a very strange color and very cool to see. Yeah, the articulation is limited these days, but if you never got around to picking up a classic Seeker, and it's still a decent toy. Just I don't know. It's just not quite aging the way I would like it to. I do think Thrust, however, does maintain an edge thanks to all the extra playability he comes with. So that would be my recommendation if you have no preference. And now I have to go find a missile. This is why I don't fire them, even if it's a good joke. Which it wasn't even a good joke, but
Wow, 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 wow.